Matthew Schneider, thanks for joining the podcast. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me here.
Founder and CEO of Building Inc.
That's right.
New tech, a lot into blockchain technology, a lot into tokenization. We'll get into those topics because I still don't understand a lot about that. So if you want to get started, we'll talk about what problems do you personally experience in real estate that led you to start Building Inc.
There's a lot. There's real estate problems. There's people problems. There's like macroeconomic issues that we're facing. And I started to culminate all of that and decide, hey, someone's got to do something about this. So it started 4 or 5 years ago when I was looking at real estate just as an investment product. People want to find something to invest into. They'll go to stocks, they'll go to bonds. What about real estate property? And I knew someone who was investing in real estate at the time. And the first major issue I realized about this industry is that it's really socioeconomically locked. It's a rich man's game. And that's a big issue. So I was working on a marketplace at the time to connect real estate projects that needed funding, like real things in our cities, new restaurant, new office building, new apartments. They need funding. They need access to more capital. So we were connecting investors to these properties. It was a really difficult venture to kick off. And so at one point I pivoted and I said, well, now that I know more about real estate and its real struggles, like it's got capital problems, but it also has data problems and people don't really trust it. There's not a whole lot of transparency, especially not compared to other investments. There's problems on site. So in the field, just how people are doing their jobs, whether that's architects, engineers, and contractors. There's issues with how we do urban planning and zoning and policy. The technology is really difficult to implement, and some of the solutions out there really suck. So there's like a dozen different issues that I was recognizing at once that are actually all connected in some capacity. And I was the one to start to connect those dots and say, I do think that there's a really interesting relationship between how a subcontractor, like an electrician, is doing his job or her job and uploading paperwork, which becomes data, which becomes information about the buildings, which influences how expensive they are to insure or finance, which then determines what your city skyline looks like and how robust your infrastructure becomes and what connects to that. And this set the foundation for building, which ultimately, in the company, it's called Building Inc. It's ultimately this data platform for real estate. That's the simplest that I can make it. We're handling property data, but we're handling it, we're working with all sorts of people who upload that data, that want to do things with that data, that make decisions off of that. We want to drive those decisions, whether that's, do we add another story to this building? Or how do we replace the HVAC? Or what does the city need to know about the carbon footprint for this building? Or if I'm going to demolish this and put in a new lane on the highway, what do I need to know about the materials that went into this building so that we can repurpose them somewhere else? There's all sorts of data, but we're helping to collect that data about these properties, about these cities, and then aggregate it, let people trust that data, say, okay, I know what I'm working with, I can verify this, I'm not running around in circles, like, who's responsible for this? Where's this paperwork? I don't even know if this number is right. Good, clean data, and then using that to go out and build things.
That actually makes a lot of sense now because, I used to work for a real estate company and my boss would ask me, hey, go find this map of the, sewer system of the building. And I'd have to look through a bunch of different papers in a big box and just try to find it. I don't even know what I'm looking for. So it's great to have a website that centralizes everything and you can verify through the blockchain. Is that true?
Right. That is a big element. So it's good to have data, but it's better to have data you can trust. That's the big differentiator. Real estate is becoming data rich. Buildings are full of geometry and physics. There's people involved with them. There's dollar signs. But we have to go one step further and also say, how do we trust the numbers that we're working with? And a really simple analogy that I like to pull up is the Carfax. Like if buildings all came with a Carfax, we would know what's the information, how is stuff repaired historically, What do I need to know looking forward? Like, what's the next thing that's going to go wrong? And with real estate, it's interesting because there's actually dozens of stakeholders. There's so many people who are involved, so many different companies that need to be looking at this information to make decisions. So being able to give everyone the same information, like a golden copy, the one true source of truth for what's going on in this property. And that could be a skyscraper, a $200 million project, it could be a data center, it could be a warehouse or a hospital. So it's really important to have something that all these people can trust, because you can't have mistakes at that scale.
Mm-hmm.
It critically impacts people and their livelihoods and our cities. So when you start to incorporate a blockchain, and this is a very interesting use case, and this is one of the things that differentiated our company from a lot of the different solutions out there, is that I don't view blockchain so much as like some sort of investment tool. To me, it's a notary. So sometimes when two people will sign a piece of paper, a third party will witness it to attest that both people were there when they signed the paper. That's notarization. The blockchain is a virtual notary. So when I send you money, when I send you an asset, when I send you something from my wallet to your wallet, it's on this ledger online that says person A to person B, the transaction occurred, but that transaction you can't go back and rewrite that historically. It's immutable. And that's the notary function, where it's not just that I moved money from point A to point B, or I moved a document from point A to point B, or I signed a document, but you can trust it. Anyone can trust it. It's not dependent on whether I'm trustworthy. We don't have to bring in another company to verify it. It's inherent in how a blockchain is designed. And that's really interesting. So now taking that back to real estate, where we have dozens of people involved, hundreds of people involved, hundreds of documents, and hundreds of millions of dollars on the line, you definitely want some sort of functionality where you can trust all the numbers, all the paperwork, all the transactions, and all the people involved. And a blockchain offers that. So we started to say, how do we use this really cool technology to bring trust into one of the most opaque and yet critical industries in the entire world? And to me, it's not just the most critical, but everything that people know is real estate. It's the built environment. It's the roof over your head. It's how you're going to walk safely to school. It is the school as well. It's where your food is grown. So everything is real estate. So the fact that we've gotten by on like shoestring and bubble gum, just holding everything together barely, is quite impressive. But I don't know how long that can continue.
Mm-hmm.
So making the decision now to bring in quintessential technology and right our wrongs, have trust in this massive industry, and not just move it forward, but I think like move civilization forward. That's the scale and the impact that I'm working with, and what I think is truly possible. That's why this is so exciting. That's why so many people are talking about blockchain. That's why the whole world is talking about blockchain. Not just because it's a crypto thing, but
Yeah.
like we're literally transforming industries, not just real estate, also logistics and supply chain and healthcare and agriculture. This is bigger than the internet almost.
But I feel like that's what people don't understand, is whenever the common person hears blockchain, they automatically tie it to crypto.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be a big hump that at least America, I don't know about China, all these other countries who actually know what they're talking about, but how America is going to get over that hump and realize that blockchain isn't just crypto. This technology could be used for so many other different things. And what do you think that's going to take to get everybody to understand that?
Well, you need more conversations like this. Podcasts that are willing to ask, what is an alternative use for blockchain? I don't want to talk about crypto. I want to talk about how the world around us is changing and evolving, what the real use cases are. And I'm in a unique position where I am a founder, I'm an executive, I sit on a board of directors for an organization, but I'm also a researcher. And so I like to think that I bring very grounded perspective to the conversations, whether that's in an interview, a podcast, a panel, a keynote, and say, what's the reality? I don't want to overhype something. I don't want to be overly optimistic. I want to say, what's the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses, challenges and opportunities for this technology. You have to be a realist like that. That was the mistake that I made with my first company, where I said, well, what if we use all sorts of technologies to help people invest better? But I didn't ask myself, why does this not already exist? If it's a great idea, surely someone's tried it. And the reality was people did, and they failed for a myriad of reasons. And I just ignored those. I just looked at the potential upside, which was household name, Robinhood for real estate, get people investing. So when you ground yourself in reality, you are preparing yourself against being blindsided by just how difficult it is to run a business or to implement a technology. And that's the thing with blockchain is, if it were a silver bullet and as spectacular as some people will hype it up to be, and it's great, but it doesn't solve all of your problems, then you wouldn't need people trying to convince you to use the technology. You would already be using it. A really good example is artificial intelligence. You don't have to convince someone to use ChatGPT. They use it once and ask a question, and it responds like a human being and answers with all of the world's knowledge at your fingertips. That is self-evident. The value within that is self-evident. And with blockchain, it's not always self-evident. So I think that this manages expectations and lays the foundation for me to run a really strong business, because I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I'm not overselling. I'm not getting people too excited and then charging them something that they don't really want long term.
Yeah. How do you get, majority of property owners are from the ages of, 40 to 70 or whatever it is. Like, the baby boomers, our parents' kind of age. How do you convince those people that this is something they should use? Because that's your customer base, isn't it? The people who own the properties.
Right. It's the real estate developers, the asset managers. The reality is that, I've been using that word a lot. What I recognized is that there's a demographic change happening and a wealth transfer that's occurring. New leadership is stepping up into the built environment. And people are saying, we don't want to be an archaic firm anymore, or a company that's outdated and falling behind. What can we do to get ahead? So younger folks, people who are maybe native to technology or more open-minded to it, are stepping into senior roles, executive roles, and using this as an opportunity to get ahead in the market. This becomes their competitive edge. They said, we see other people are starting to adopt technologies. We're not going to be the last one to do it. And we're not going to let an overage board of directors stop us from becoming a very competitive company. So that's working in our favor. But now your question was, for those who have not yet conducted that transfer of leadership, maybe it's just passing down the company to a child or bringing in fresh blood, I have to say I don't really work with them, to be honest. And you can't as a startup. You don't have the capacity to spend months trying to convince a firm that your technology is the latest and greatest. I will just find someone who is
motivated.
Exactly. Right. And that's
wants to get into the new tech.
Right. And that's the younger folks. So I start there. I say, you want to be data driven? That's great. You want to be innovative. You want to be bleeding edge. You appreciate that the world is changing and that you have to stay on the bleeding edge. Great. You're my customer base.
So let's fast forward 20 years from now. Building Inc. is a lot bigger than it is today. Kind of the use case is going to be, I want to buy a property. So can I go on to Building Inc. and kind of see all the, the example we used before, the Carfax, but like the building facts of the building, see what's wrong with it. That I can confirm on blockchain. Is that kind of the use case?
So yes and no. Yes, in that you're going to be using our tool to look at property information, to trust it, and we call that the building certificate. And that's why I chose the name that's so simple. It's like, has this been building certified? Just like Carfax. Just fun to say. The difference is that we don't publicize this data. In fact, we don't even have it under our control. Our platform is just a steward of that property owner's data. And that's because there's a lot of intellectual property and competitive edge in some of that data asymmetry. So you don't want everything being publicized. There still has to be controls and compliance.
So it's not fully decentralized?
Well, it's the decentralized component is that all of this data being handled on the platform is getting a digital fingerprint on the blockchain. It's not just us looking over information and then giving it a check mark. It's not the property owner. It's being verified with the blockchain. Now, there still has to be people involved because a blockchain doesn't have the intelligence to look at your lease report and say, this is a real lease report. But assuming that someone signed off on that, you can then blockchain that, give it the digital fingerprint so that it's trusted. What happens in real estate is that if I do hand you a document, you will probably go to a third party and say, can you please verify this information that Matthew just gave me? Then, 6 months from now, we might be handling that same document. Nothing's changed, but only you and I know that. So now we bring in another person who says, I need a third party to consult and confirm that you guys have not been delivered the document. And this happens over and over across tens of thousands of documents, and it's costing you time and money. So if you could just say, you don't have to take our word for it, when this document was produced and signed off by the city or the accountant or the accountants or the attorney, it got a digital fingerprint and it hasn't changed since. How can I trust that digital fingerprint? Because we don't control the blockchain. The blockchain is decentralized across millions of computers and it was just baked in a way that it's immutable. So that's the decentralized element. Now, we want the data to be accessible to some degree, because that's the point of collecting it all so that it's accessible, but it has to be accessible to the right people. So the first instinct is not to give it to your competitors and say, here's how we're running our property effectively, and here's all of our vendors. But the insurance company will need to know. The bank will need to know. Your investors need to know. So those are the right people to put that information into the hands of. And we have all sorts of gates to ensure that the right people are getting access to that. And that is very in line with something called like SOC 2 compliance. So just your controls over this information and who can see it, because you don't want your secrets getting out. Now, some of the information will be more publicized, and this goes into something that I talk about with capital markets. So right now, real estate is treated as a financial product, which means people are putting money into it. They're using it as collateral a little bit, but it's not finance ready. So what's going to happen is using blockchain to verify all of this information is going to make real estate a lot more reliable. And when it's more reliable and more trustworthy, we're more willing to put money into it, and a lot of money. The banks are willing to treat it better. Private credits or private equity, they're willing to play a little bit more fair with real estate once they can start to trust it. Now, what's something that people do trust? Publicly listed things. Apple stock, Tesla stock. Never mind the volatility. All of the numbers are there, all of the reporting is there, and there's big consequences if you're not transparent about it. We're trying to move real estate in that same direction, where we say, this building that I'm sitting in right now is actually privately owned. It's not on any sort of stock market or exchange. But what if I could still trust it? Because there's no regulatory body that is taking whatever the address is of this building and checks in every month and says, how are you guys doing on paperwork? How does everything look? So if I could still take a random building like this in a random place in Chicago, and it's as trustworthy as a stock, a publicly traded stock, that's pretty revolutionary. And then I would be just as confident investing into this as I would Apple, because I know the transparency is there, I know the data is there, the frameworks, and if the property owner were lying, there would be real consequences. Right now, there's no consequences. I can make up whatever. Nobody's checking. If Apple's fudges numbers, there's huge consequences. You can't do that. So that's the direction we're starting to move in. It's not just the data, but if we can trust all the data about all of these properties, we could start to finance them better. you're going to see real estate open up like never before.
Now, how do you avoid your, like you said earlier, your competitors in the real estate world getting the information you don't want them to?
Well, a really good platform is essential to that. What information is actually being made readily available?
Like someone trying to poach a tenant of yours. Someone trying to, so they look through all the data, the leases and everything. They usually wouldn't be available unless they were selling the property.
So is it a tenant who is trying to get access to the...
Let's say, Starbucks does this a lot. Starbucks, I don't know how long the lease has left. It's got maybe 5 years left. And I know they're paying some market and they're going to want to move out and get a new building. Mm-hmm. And I'm a developer. And I can verify that the lease has 5 years left. So, okay, I'm going to try to poach them in a few years and build them a new property down the street. How do you avoid, as a property owner, giving that information out? The lease information?
Well, it depends on who has the lease information. If the tenant is willing to share the lease information, then the property owner has no control over that. That's out with them. The question is, does the tenant also know what the property owner is paying for insurance? Does the tenant know who the subcontractors are? Do they know what the taxes are on the property? That's other information that is probably not available. So of course, if someone were to leak information that they are familiar with, that's a problem between them and another company. But presumably they don't have access to other things that they should not have jurisdiction over. And so that's how you can implement controls, where if someone were to have access to this platform, to your data room, to your war room, you only let them see certain things. Mm-hmm. The accountant needs to see financial things. They may not need to see the blueprints. They may not need to know or hold on to the 3D model or the building, the BIM. So imagine our computer software where your architects and engineers are literally designing where every single wire, screw, and pipe is going to go in that building. That doesn't have to be shared with the accountant. And you wouldn't want it to be, because that's real intellectual prowess. What it takes to design a property successfully is not gathered overnight. It takes expertise, and you want that in-house. So you can set up these controls that say only certain people can see certain things at certain times. And this is very interesting, because if I were to invest in a property as if it were Apple, then I would say I want to see all of the numbers and all of the data. And this is another thing that blockchain does that's very, very interesting. And it's called a zero knowledge proof. The best example of a zero knowledge proof is if you go to a bar, if I give you my ID, you're going to see my address, my height, my weight, all my details. It's a lot of information when you're just trying to check if I was born in a certain year. So what's the alternative? You're going to eyeball the person. If someone has a gray beard, you know right there that they're over 21 without having to see their address and all their personal information. So if you apply that same principle to something like real estate, where we can see a valuation for a property, and we can see that 100 different inputs on a spreadsheet made up that valuation, and it's all blockchain verified, and we just see the verification portion, we just see the gray beard, but you don't see the underlying details, then what you've done is you still have the same trust in the system without revealing all of that information. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's essentially saying, because the blockchains cannot be manipulated, you can trust them inherently. And that means when the blockchains verify something, we can trust the outputs, even if we don't see the inputs.
And I heard this technology. If you want to talk about, we're going to get into tokenization a little bit as well. And I'll have a follow-up question too. If you wanted to explain what tokenization is in the simplest terms, I'll be able to explain to a 5-year-old.
Well, I can only simplify it so far, but if we think about what a blockchain is, well, I'd have to ask the 5-year-old if they know what a notary is. I presume no. So in real time, I'm trying to reword this. Just saying, I want to be able to move money. I want to send money to. I want to send information, but I want us to be able to trust each other when we do it. Now, it doesn't just have to be a made-up currency. It doesn't have to be a Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be a meme coin. I can do that with something real. I can do that with a paper contract. And so when you say, I want this paper contract to be secured by the blockchain, you've tokenized it. When I say, here's
That's the ultimate verification is tokenization.
Correct. So it's just moving something onto a blockchain. But really what you're saying is, I want this contract. I want this ownership. I want this right to something. I have a concert ticket, whatever. I want it to be secured by the blockchain because I know blockchains can be trusted. That's tokenization.
So in essence, nothing will ever be able to be forged again. Fake.
Well, not necessarily, because blockchains verify as it is. If I give you a contract and I say, well, here's the contract, here's a signature on it, but it wasn't my signature, the blockchain can't see that it isn't my signature. It can just verify that the contract existed and that it moved over to you. That's where we bring in something called attestation. So as I sign it off, if someone who is responsible and licensed and regulated, like a lawyer, an attorney, also says, at this moment of time, this contract is good, and then we blockchain it, then that's a really good way to verify it. So, because we have their attestation embedded into the verification. So then 6 months from now, you look back, you see, here's the contract, here's the digital fingerprint, and here's the identity of the person who signed off at that time. And I can also then connect that to their license for conducting law in the state of Illinois. So there's all sorts of things that attach to it. Mm-hmm. But interestingly, if I hand you that contract and it were a forged signature, then you take that to court and you say, here's the contracts that we signed on, and it's verified by the blockchain. The court can look at that and see, we do see that the original contract, which is verified by the blockchain, was illegitimate. Because maybe last minute I say, no, Alex has the wrong contract. Here's the real one. And I hand you a proper contract. And I say, he's crazy. I don't know where he got that other one for. And you're going to say, dude, this is what you signed. And here's the blockchain to prove it. So it doesn't necessarily prevent the fraud in the first place, but it does expose it.
Mm-hmm. And my follow-up to the whole tokenization thing is, I know you're in real estate, talk a lot about real estate. Do you believe that real estate will be tokenized one day? Ownership, deeds to properties, all this kind of stuff will all be tokenized in the next 10, 20 years.
I think in the next 20 years, I think all sorts of real world assets will be tokenized. And that's happening gradually, whether that's money market funds, bonds, private credit, all sorts of financial instruments. They're being tokenized so that they can operate on blockchains, so that you take out a lot of the trust that's necessary, or cross-checking information, double-checking the numbers, settlement times, just making sure we're all on the same page before we do something critical, because you have $1 billion at stake. You definitely cross your T's, dot your I's, and double-check. So lots of tokenization is going to occur. Interestingly, real estate has been really slow to adopt this. And it goes back to people not really understanding the industry and overhyping what the technology can do. People will say blockchain can fractionalize ownership. If you really think about what a blockchain is, that's not a true statement. So why are we talking about that? Blockchains are really supposed to be ledgers and notaries so that we can peer-to-peer move information and trust it. And it's notarized right there and then. So why are we talking about fractionalization? Or people will say it creates liquidity. Liquidity is how quickly you can get cash for something. So cash is cash, therefore it's the most liquid. Next is if I hand you a gold bar. You can easily get your cash value for a gold bar. If I hand you something that you're not really sure what the worth is, and you don't even want to buy it in the first place, how am I supposed to get the cash equivalent? I probably won't, which means it's illiquid. Imagine I have to pay rent. Landlord says, I need $1,500. So I show up with this microphone stand and this microphone, and I say, will you take this for my rent? You go, no, I don't know what this is or what it's worth. I just want the cash. So then I have to figure out, okay, how do I sell this and where do I sell it? Do I go on eBay? So that's liquidity. So now people are saying, well, we want liquidity in real estate. Big properties are worth something. If this building is worth $20 million, how quickly can I get $20 million cash for this property? Historically, it's very illiquid. You can't find the buyers. It takes months to do all the paperwork. So people started saying, well, we'll use blockchains and that would make it more liberal. The way that they approach that is just inherently incorrect because it assumed that money is just floating around freely on blockchains. Why do people think that? Because they look at all the coins and they say, well, this coin has a huge market cap. For Bitcoin is worth $90,000. It's worth $2 trillion across its market cap. So that's a lot of money. That's money on the blockchain. So why can't that money just show up in my property if I put it on the blockchain? And it's just a misunderstanding of how capital markets works because at the end of the day, you still have to find a buyer. So where blockchain does help out, and this is one of the big things that I qualify when I go to handles or whatever, I say, sure, it could help with liquidity, but not in the way that you think. The way it's going to help is that all the paperwork and all the due diligence and all the repairs and all that type of stuff that does take a lot of time, if that's been verified, it's got the Carfax, then you're willing to buy really quickly, which means the money gets in my hand. So that's how it increases liquidity, but it doesn't just make money magically show up at your door.
Mm-hmm. So now in the future, there'll be a coin that says, like, for example, this is 100 Elm Lane, this property. Let's just say 100 Elm Lane token. And that's the certification that I own this property, this token. And if I list it, let's say on a website that's linked, and I could be totally botching this, but it's like linked to, let's say, Building Inc., where you can see all facts and everything. You negotiate with the buyer, and then he purchases that token with whatever currency he wants to use on the website. And he just clicks a few buttons, clicks it. Now the token gets transferred over to him. Is that kind of how it works?
Kind of, sort of. So the big caveat is that in the U.S., property deeds are handled at the county level. So there's 300, 200 registrar of deeds that are working with outdated technology. So if you wanted it to be as simple as moving a token from me to you, you have to get buy-in from the county. So that part is still going to be slow. Still going to be some paperwork, and you're going to get a paper deed, and it's going to be held with the county. But everything leading up to that, the verification, the money, the capital stack, so the equity in a property or some of the debt, that can be tokenized, and that can be transacted really quickly. Now, what's interesting is that there's global instances. The first two that come to mind are Dubai. So the Dubai Land Department in the UAE worked with Vara and some local companies, so their virtual assets regulator, to say, what if we did take deeds, property deeds, which are handled in the most old-fashioned way, and tokenized them, so that I can send you a token, and that's the property right there. And then it doesn't have to be registered anywhere else. We trust the blockchain. It's like, just send me the token. So they're pulling that off. The next place is actually Saudi Arabia. They just passed sweeping regulation to say property should not be so outdated. What if we start putting our deeds on a blockchain-based infrastructure? You know, it can be trusted. We also know it can move stuff. So we trust it with our real estate, and we're going to move our real estate there. The U.S. is a little bit behind. So in other words, we're beating around the bush in order to do what we want to accomplish. Of course, we want real estate to transact completely on the blockchain, but it's not ready. So we're finding other things where we can supplement blockchain and speed up that process while we wait for the real bread and butter, the real magic, which is going to be, here's the token.
Yeah.
And everything's in it.
We talked about it before the show. You're traveling all around the world, doing, speaking events, panels. You had a story about how you almost went to Iran, and it's interesting because when we think about the people leading the race in tokenization, in blockchain, you don't think of Saudi Arabia or Iran.
Well, Iran is not so much leading the charge, but they're very interested. So what those regions have in common, and China and India or Brazil, is that they're all BRICS nations. And so, right, America is still the crypto capital, I would say, and the EU has done a lot, but they might be plateauing. And the BRICS nations are starting to accelerate things because they recognize that the US dollar is weakening substantially. And so you can't have a global economy based off of a weakening currency and backed by a government that is increasingly unstable. The reason why the US dollar took precedent everywhere is because people trusted the US. We paid our debts, we have responsible leadership, and the dollar, while it was inflationary, it was not out of control. That's no longer true. So people don't want to associate with the US dollar. It's still embedded everywhere, and we will go kidnap your president. I mean, we just attacked Venezuela this morning, right? So we are willing to do things to make sure that people play with the US dollar, but that doesn't work if you are a legitimate scaled country like China. You're not going to attack China. We can attack Venezuela. We can get tough on Iran or Iraq. We can destabilize countries. But for the big players, they're getting out of our grasp. And we call that American hegemony, which is where we kind of control the world. That's weakening a lot. So China, Brazil, South Africa, and there's a whole lot of countries joining BRICS. They're saying, what if we find an alternative way to move value, have a different currency at the core of it, and bring it back to gold? That's where the conversation really settles. Gold and silver are economic canaries in the coal mine. And so what you're seeing is that these are becoming more and more valuable, which signals that the American empire is weakening quite a bit. And so, well, why don't we take what's the most tried, true, and tested, and also increasing in value asset, and do that with gold? What's interesting is that because gold is all tracked, it's mined, it's put into vaults and treasuries, and it has custodians, and then everything has a VIN. That means there's some sort of paperwork with some sort of tracking mechanism behind that. You could blockchain it. So you can actually tokenize gold, and then you can use that as a new currency between Iran and Russia, the two most heavily sanctioned countries right now. And their currencies have blown up. Like the Iranian rial is, I mean, it's kind of fluctuated. Sometimes it says it's 50,000 for $1. Sometimes it's $200,000 for $1. So they need to find an alternative if they want to do trade with other countries, because nobody wants the rial. Same thing happened with the Russian ruble. So they're saying, what if we use the blockchain? 2 countries, 3 countries, we can all trust it. It's blockchain. And then we start to transact on it. And we have new forms of currencies that are reliable and politically agnostic. Everyone agrees on gold. So everyone's going to transact in gold. That's cool. You could also do that with real estate. You could do that with oil, silver, all sorts of other instruments. So it's not so much that they're ahead, but they're so much more eager because it gives them financial freedom. One thing that people don't know about Iran is that they are not part of the SWIFT system. So all the central banks and anyone who wants to move money is participating in the SWIFT system. It's a very Western ideal.
I know there's a SWIFT number whenever I send international money.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's because you're settling in US dollars. Both banks have US dollars in their reserves, so they can afford to move US dollars from one to the other. If you don't have access to that system and you don't have US dollars, then you can't do business with the world. So Iran has been cut out from doing business with a lot of the world because they're not part of the SWIFT system. If they're saying, how can we truly have a country with financial freedom and the ability to do global trade if you're sanctioning us and saying we're not allowed to play with you? We did the same thing with Russia.
America has disallowed Iran from being involved in the SWIFT system.
So ultimately they call the shots. They don't control SWIFT per se, but if America wants it, America gets it. And so, but we have our allies in Western Europe as well. And so we all get on the same page and we say, okay, the system is going to now exclude this country from participation because we believe that they have violated human rights or they don't share Western ideals. They're not democratic.
Do you think America as an empire over the next 20 years will fall to the BRICS nations? And I know the BRICS nations have tried to shift over to their own currencies and America shot it down. Do you think there will be some point where it will shift to America's not number one anymore? The BRICS nations are. And do you think it might take like a world war, some catastrophic event?
What's interesting is that the BRICS nations stopped themselves from creating a new currency because you can't get Brazil to use a Chinese yuan, or you're not going to get Russia and India to agree on something. So they couldn't all come to agreements and say we're all going to use this new currency that is set up by China, that's set up by South Africa. But they do have unique trade agreements within each other's, which is really what BRICS is establishing, as saying it's an alternative to the Western trade agreements and to the SWIFT network. In terms of the American empire fallen, it depends on how you classify fall.
Because not number one anymore.
Well, and it also depends on number one, and what is it GDP, is it population? Because if you take the aggregate of the BRICS nations, it's billions of people, and their purchasing power already surpasses the U.S. and some of our Western allies, which is incredible. So in some ways, they are number one. Now you could also
military.
Military.
That's really the ultimate number one, I guess, because whoever's the strongest, whoever you're the most feared to go to war with, I guess, is always number one, right?
Right. And that works to a certain extent. And that's why we've been doubling down on our demonstrations of power more recently. That's why Trump tried to institute the parade, and we are attacking other countries. It's to say we're still in the game, and we're increasing our military funding. Just try to maintain that number one, because the logic is there that you could be number one if you have the strongest military. The thing is, it only goes so far, because let's say that we disagree with China on trade, which is kind of what's happening with Taiwan. Like, well, they're trying to trade semiconductors and manufacture here, and who does Taiwan belong to? The U.S. and China are not going to directly attack each other. Like, both countries have fantastic, powerful militaries. So why don't we just start bombing each other? Why don't we just nuke each other? And then the real number one would come out on top. So if you don't use your military because you don't want to blow up the world, then the military only goes so far as a demonstration. It's more used for country number 51 and beyond, where it's like too small, too irrelevant. They couldn't do anything that end the world catastrophically. Another perspective is infrastructure. We were starting to talk about this. Even if China doesn't want to call itself number one in urban planning and development and infrastructure, there's really interesting statistics about their academic institutions and how many engineers they produce every single year.
Just about to ask you that. I heard a statistic about that too.
What was the statistic that you heard?
China pushes out more engineers every year than America has total.
It's one of my favorite stats. Now, how true is it? We're not completely sure. It depends on how you run the numbers. Like, there's a lot of different types of engineers, right? But I have used that in the past to just demonstrate the scale at which these countries are operating. It goes back to the population. When China has 2 billion population and India and Pakistan have 2 billion population, they're already number one. They're half the world right there. And those are countries that are friendly with us, but not necessarily in our circle. So now they're producing all the engineers. They're producing people who are going into manufacturing. They can control all the labor and the production, and therefore global trade. So that's a huge component. Then if you look at like renewables, so in the next few years, China is going to produce more by solar alone than the entire U.S. in all of our different sources, whether that's solar, wind, natural gas,
electricity,
coal, for electricity. So they've just been mass producing these solar panels and implementing them everywhere. Now, I think solar is a phenomenal solution. It's not the end-all be-all. Nuclear is better for sure. But when you see how China is playing their cards and they're saying, we're going to be quietly number one, and we're going to do it in ways that aren't measured. China has less GDP than us. Who cares? Our GDP is made up. Right now, our GDP is just like OpenAI.
Tech.
Yeah, and people moving money between each other and not, it doesn't
Producing
trickle down.
anything. Because America doesn't produce anything anymore.
Right.
It's all technology is making our GDP. But China's GDP is mostly production.
Yeah, right. And what's interesting is I like talking about GDP because it's the most irrelevant thing. Whether it's GDP gross or per capita, when you're paying off your credit card interest and your company is profiting off of that, there's some GDP right there. It doesn't make anything better. It doesn't contribute. If I pay you $20 to dig a hole and you pay me $20 to fill back in the hole, we just had $40 in gross domestic product and nothing was accomplished. So it's a weird metric to be number one, and that's kind of how we rank the world right now. So people will say Mississippi has a greater GDP than much of European countries. It's like, what really constitutes GDP in Mississippi? And does it actually mean that you're more productive? Does that mean that you have more robust infrastructure? Because we all make that joke because we know that Mississippi, in terms of how it ranks among the U.S. states, is and maybe subpar, right, 45 to 50. So China, it's so interesting how they have quietly passed us in ways that are not ranked, mostly because it's more qualitative, not quantitative.
Mm-hmm. And I hear a lot about Chinese cities and how beautiful, how large, and all these brand new buildings, but that doesn't get talked about in America. Why is that?
Well, the Chinese real estate sector is very interesting because it does have its own problems. It is going through a bubble.
Yeah, I heard they can't fill the buildings either.
Yeah,
as well.
a lot of
they're all brand new buildings.
Right, right. So I have to mention that so that I don't glaze them outright. However, they are very effective at developing cities, urban planning, having affordable and accessible infrastructure, or like public transit, for example, where you can get across the country or get to your job.
They have the speed, what do they call the trains that are going 200 miles an hour?
Right. So they have high-speed rail, but then they also have trams, trolleys, buses, shuttles, and all sorts of different things for bicycles that you can just pick up off the road. You hop on it, you take it to your destination, someone else picks it up from there. And, you know, it's either super, super affordable or free, and then it's also in really good condition, which is a big difference between the Lime scooters that we have, or the Lime bikes, or around the U.S., where it's just in such shabby condition. It's gross, or they'll be lying in the road, or it costs you $3 per minute to ride it. It's not very effective. So people look at that, or they look at the buses, and you know, there's been high-profile cases in the U.S. where people are taking the bus and they are attacked, or there's just nasty stuff happening in our metros. That is far less common in China, but that's more of a political question than a real estate question, because you can develop it. The question is, can you get people to use it? Then you do need authority, and that's one thing that China is very effective at, and it gets a lot of disapproval from the U.S., which is that they have strong authority, very strong policing, where if you are jaywalking, or if you are dumping your trash onto the street, or if you do attack someone, there's no flexibility. There's punishment. There's consequence for doing that. But you have to ask, is that the price that we want to pay to live in civilized, clean society? Because right now we have the latter in a lot of U.S. cities, and people complain about how dirty it is. So it's like, where do you want to sit on the spectrum?
Yeah, because I heard China's got cameras in the street that can detect if you're jaywalking and immediately, like, bill you at your house.
A lot of that's science fiction and American propaganda.
Yeah.
So the social credit score system, and this is, you've gotten certainly down a rabbit.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about like the U.S. has all of this stuff being quietly implemented. That's Palantir, that was Doge, which acted as a backdoor for a lot of these AI companies, where they're going to start cross-referencing your health data and the FBI statistics and all this stuff that really has sat in silos and say, well, this person committed this crime or they're not paying up on this, and then using unrelated things as a punishment, which is just as dystopian as the concept of a social credit score in China, where they say, well, if you disagree with the governments, then you're not allowed to do this. That's already happening in the US, where if you disagree on one thing or you're too outspoken, they'll revoke your visa. Or you're kicked off of social media, or you can't get hired. So it's like we have a lot of the same things. We just give ourselves a pass, and then we say, well, China is this or China is that, and point out to the bully. And that doesn't necessarily mean I agree with an outright authoritative thing, but if you don't want people blowing through red lights, for example, which happens all the time and it kills a lot of people, and you need some sort of consequence, blowing people do that. And guess what? Illinois actually has tons of traffic cameras. The other day I went online, and it all gets streamed online. You can type in Department of Transportation and click on any camera in the state and watch the feed. So why is that acceptable? But if that's done in a foreign land, it's dystopian and authoritative.
Because like you said, they word it in such a way that they make it seem acceptable. And they make it seem like it's not an invasion of privacy when it comes to this kind of stuff. And we'll get back to the blockchain and everything. I just have one quick question. You brought up how Doge was kind of acting as a smokescreen for them to implement certain monitoring avenues like Palantir. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? Because Doge, I feel like Trump implemented it and then it went away one day randomly.
Correct. Well, it was an utter failure. So the Department of Government Efficiency, they were trying to discontinue very minute funding. So people would say, well, USA was spending $200,000 a year on this stupid thing. People would applaud. Cool. We've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars on going into other countries, or we spend it routinely on Social Security and on Medicaid and Medicare and all these things that are like socialisms. People are on the one hand saying, wow, I can't believe all this money is going to the social program. Meanwhile, half of the country's money is going into keeping people over 57, giving them income and giving them healthcare. So it's like we have really interesting lines that we draw for a lot of stuff. But getting back to Doge, so Doge had unchecked entry into many of the government's branches and bureaucratic bodies and all the alphabet groups. FBI, CIA, USA, and all these DOTs. So it had unchecked power to inspect people's information and check for fraud. And one of their ways to check for fraud is they were running algorithms. The algorithms were supplemented by Palantir. And Palantir is predominantly not a U.S. company, no matter how it's painted to be. It's really foreign intelligence and the people and the funders and all that. So the fact that now we have systems in place that probably don't have Americans' best interest in mind, because it's not to enhance America or to make us more effective at something or make us more productive. It's to keep people in check, really, and to institute consequences for maybe doing something that's out of line with the current agenda, which I don't really think moves the country forward. So when that exists and they have all this stuff that's inspecting the data and it's not anonymized, and we don't really know what they're doing with it because nobody's looking inside of these companies, that's a huge threat, really, to national security. And we know that on many instances, supposedly allied countries of ours have sold intelligence that they gathered to other countries, including China. So no, companies like Palantir should not be part of this made-up Department of Government Efficiency, which just actually did disappear one day. They said they were going to get rid of a bunch of fraud. They did not. Meanwhile, rampant spending proceeds in other places. And now we have all these AI tools in the government that are black boxes. We don't know what's going on inside of them. We don't know what we're doing with that. And then the relaxation of regulation of artificial intelligence is also really not a great decision. Now, the bills said that it couldn't be regulated at the state level. It could be regulated at the federal level. But they're not going to do anything at the federal level. So it just kind of stopped everything in its tracks. And meanwhile, like you have all the worst use cases of AI emerging now, where people are doing terribly manipulative things, and there's no way to
fake videos,
people committing crimes. Now Grok is undressing kids in Twitter feeds, and people are saying, how is there no consequence for this at all? I mean, this is downright terrible. But at the same time, you also have the Epstein files, which is like two sides of that same coin, which is like, okay, yeah, there's a full lot of terrible trafficking going on. We're also not doing anything about that. So we have a very unserious government in that regard, but there has to be regulation of AI. Of course, we want to win the AI race, but you win that with robust infrastructure, because if you look at Alan Turing and the Turing test and all of the equations that went into that, so if Alan Turing was, he helped crack the Enigma code, and he actually wrote about artificial intelligence 80 years ago. And one of the things that he predicted, and this was continued throughout the next decades, is that our ability to have efficient artificial intelligence is not going to be limited by our computing capacity or how sophisticated the software is. It's just how much energy we have. And that's still true today. So now we're building all these data centers, and we want AI tools, and we have terrible infrastructure. Japan is where countries like China are beating us. So our ducks are not in a row. There's so many massive deals going on just for the sake of removing money and making it look like progress. I should get off my soapbox, though.
So we're building all these data centers, which require a lot of energy. And like you said, America doesn't have the infrastructure for that energy. What can America do to improve our infrastructure when it comes to energy?
Well, we need people advocating for infrastructure in the built environment. And this is where my software company, my real estate company, has something bigger in mind. When I talk about building, it's not just a noun, it's also a verb. I want people to be building things. And I think we need a lot more young people. I'm Gen Z. I know that my hairline is deceiving, but running a startup is stressful. So as a Gen Z, I want a lot more people being interested in what the future of the country looks like, and maybe gravitating towards more boring jobs or less sensational careers where they say, I want to be an architect, I want to be an engineer, I want to be a data scientist, I want to do something that is going to move the country forward. I want to be in civil engineering or urban planning. I want to be working as an electrical engineer, whatever, solar panel installer, and being excited about playing an essential role in what the country looks like in the next 100 years and saying, I'm doing my part to improve the country, and get fired up about that. Everything that we have today is because people thousands of years ago and over this timeline got equally excited and said, we're going to build something that lasts. We're going to build Rome, and it's still going to persist to this day, and it's going to inspire people. Where's that same energy now? So you need people who say, we want robust infrastructure. We want the next generation to be better off. We want to transform the world. We want to get people to space again. Or we want more equitable and accessible housing. We want clean places for people to live, good water, clean air, good public transportation, all these types of things. People should be fired up about that. Then they should be designing products. They should be advocating for. They should be having these sorts of conversations, even though it's not as exciting as your Family Guy clips or whatever your streamer is doing. Those same people are going to complain about how awful the world is. What are you doing to reverse course? Because, I know that things suck right now, and we're not responsible for that. We're being handed it. But unless the plan is to let everyone die off and suffer and become wage slaves, then someone has to turn something around. So I kind of see that not that I have a responsibility, but I'm embracing the role and the potential and the possibility to inspire people to be part of something bigger and see if they can redirect us. Because other parts of the world are doing it. It's not impossible. There's a lot of countries that are doing things right. Can we take notes and can we apply it here in the US? We are the people who are going to become the elite human capital. Our generation can become the politicians and the lawyers, the doctors. They can be the regulators, the inventors and innovators. There's no reason why not. So then if we do ascend to those levels of power, why don't we start making decisions that we all agree with and are good for society?
Definitely. I wanted to go back a little bit to the whole AI talk we had a little bit. It's not really about the regulations in itself, but it's about who's implementing the regulations, who's making the regulations.
Mm-hmm.
Who do you see is going to make the regulations in the future for AI? And what do those look like?
Well, a lot of it is very politically driven. And I think the first thing that's going to be under attack is true freedom of speech, whether that's how it's produced or how it's censored. And so whatever administration exists at that time that says AI is now being used to distribute this information that we disagree with, they are going to institute that regulation. Because it really can't, constitutionally, AI doesn't overlap with the other amendments. It's really just speech predominantly. It's not going to change while we quarter troops or something. So that's where I think the regulation and the bills are going to go into place, because people are going to say, this is spreading misinformation about this topic or that. And we saw this both directions, where in the 2021, or really 2020 to 2023 and 4 period, the Biden administration had implemented a lot of policy against what information was being distributed online. And a lot of it was automated. It's not really people posting it. To some degree, it's true. But just the fact that it existed in mass, and they said, well, we don't want you to post about this. So that went into effect. Now, of course, the Trump administration unraveled a lot of that. And part of the deal was that big tech would stop enforcing that. And then they helped fund the Trump campaign. And now there's a lot of favors being returned. So they said, if you soften all of this, we're not going to tell you to censor this information, whether it's about, like the Hunter Biden case was very prominent, but so was COVID information. So if you say this about vaccines or that, then the post is going to be limited in visibility. Now we're seeing quite the opposite, where people who disagree with the Trump administration or some of the foreign policy are also being throttled and toppled. So is it more free? No. So I don't know what administration is going to exist in 2028. I don't even know if I can make a prediction, because things are so wacky nowadays. Mm-hmm. Who knows? But whoever that is, I think at that point, AI will be at scale, and the amount of information that's going to be out there is going to be overwhelming to the human sense that we no longer know if we're actually at war with Venezuela, or if we did drop a bomb in Iran, because the government and all of its proxies would be able to mass produce robust and convincing evidence that it happened. What's my thoughts?
And before we get into back into blockchain, one last question. Who do you think is winning the technology race? America or China? Because America is, from a lot of Americans say, is the tech country of the world, because that's where most of our money comes from, is tech. We're not really in the industrial industry as much as China is anymore. So who do you think is winning the tech race?
Well, tech is big and broad. Here's an interesting stat. Just came out on the Financial Times 2 days ago. BYD, the Chinese car manufacturer, doubled Tesla's. It was either sales or production units. That's technology, self-driving technology, electric cars. So it looks like we've been surpassed there. And then even in like mobile phones, people will say, Apple has completely stalled in its innovation, and the price point keeps going up. We're not getting anything more out of this. Camera quality isn't really evolving anymore. Meanwhile, there's all sorts of new models for devices, whether it's Android or another Chinese brand that is slipping my mind right now. It starts with an H. But people are saying there's a lot of sales here. It's widespread. They have all sorts of new models in things that, in terms of specifications, surpass iPhones. So are we still dominating there? That's a good question. Then artificial intelligence. Our models, how well they're trained, how effectively they're implemented, that's a little bit more of a gray area. I would like to think that the US is leading for two reasons. We have more robust data sets, a lot of information that's accessible to the models and then the people who are using the models on top of them. Like, you first have to train a model using a data set, and it starts to understand, for example, the weather patterns in the state. And then you say, okay, now that you understand the weather patterns, can you please look at 2026 and how the stars are going to be aligned and predict what the weather's going to look like? So that's training on the data sets and then applying it to new use cases. So we have the data there. And then the other reason is because we have more rampant entrepreneurialism. Lots of companies, lots of people trying to find use cases for this AI to see if they can become the next unicorn, the next billionaire, and really unlock things there. So you're seeing all sorts of applications emerge where it's not that entrepreneurship is stifled in China, but the risk to reward ratio is different, because in the US, if you are a successful entrepreneur, you have uncapped potential. And that's because you have the ability to create a monopoly. And so you could really just make billions and billions of dollars. In China, they do a lot of, they break up a lot of the large companies, and capital doesn't have unlimited power over the country. So, but the people like Elon Musk who exist in the US and not China is because he does get to become maybe the first trillionaire in the world. And that brings out a different breed of entrepreneurs than it would if you put in all the sweat and work and you can only become half a billionaire.
Yeah, thought it like that. Getting back to blockchain, over the next 5 to 10 years, what are the industries that will go full-fledged to blockchain, that will completely adopt it?
So finance is blazing the trail. All right, finance is very broad. Some of it is how do we create new financial products? Some of it's financial institutions and banks and how they are going to manage money and record it, which is going to impact things like settlement times. So right now, most people are familiar with wire transfers and ACH, which all has a little bit of a delay because you have to check the books of both institutions and just make sure things are squared away before you settle. And then there's also reconciliation processes and finality. That is, those three elements are radically improved with blockchain. It just makes sense to move money in a way where we're all looking at the same spreadsheet, same information. And that's what a blockchain does really well. So you're going to see that in banking apps. You're going to see that in your SoFi, in your Robinhood. It's not really a banking app, but the way that you're moving money, or your PayPal, your Venmo, your Morgan Stanley. So blockchain is going to be foundational to these. You probably won't actually know that it's in place. You're just going to see that the settlement times disappear. Then you'll be able to custody things like cash and bonds and real estate in the same place. And you could have the same financial institution. You open up the app. You could open up your Schwab account and see everything in your portfolio. Right now, you have to go to different applications or platforms to get into real estate or to get into crypto or the holy cash. You're going to see that consolidated because blockchains don't really care what the underlying asset is. You're just recording that transaction or representing it on chain. And so that means that you can represent cash in the same place that you represent in real estate as a pair of Nike shoes that come with the best certificate of ownership. Robin, it's like, hey, who wore these and what was the last price it sold at, or fine art, blue chip art. So that's going to be really interesting when people open up their apps. They're like, oh, tap of the button, I can move money instantly into this other asset class. And then when that asset class pays me out, I can get that in my bank account right away. Well, what's attached to bank accounts? Also debit and credit cards. So you could swipe a card and receive payments or pay with like a slice of your real estate portfolio right there and then. And what is that? That's instant liquidity. Now, we talked about liquidity before, but if there's institutions involved that are helping to back and create rails, then that liquidity can exist, because what they'll do is instantly sell a portion of the real estate and probably use a reserve or liquidity pool to create that cash and not wait for a buyer. So like they'll credit you the money so you can go buy it using your real estate, and then whenever it's
what determines the live value of the property, for example?
So this is a critical thing that building does, actually. So we are huge participants, huge players in the recreation of what value means and what fair market value means, because everything has a fair market value, what it's worth at this moment in time. And what's interesting is fair market value is derived from a couple different inputs, but predominantly data. Data tells you the health of something, the performance of something, where it's come from, what other people in the market are saying. And so if you can rapidly compute that, if you have access to that data, and it's good data, then we could quickly run a calculation and say, okay, property's worth $1 million. Like, we've got all the data, it's flowing in, it's being updated, every single lease.
Comps, current rental rate, it kind of comprises all this stuff and comes to a...
Correct. And it has to be good data, because the reason why fair market value is a very touchy subject, either it takes a while to actually come up with, or you need a third party, or there's going to be some sort of premium or discount applied, like illiquidity premium or discount to the asset, is because maybe I don't have the comp data. Now I'm going to go look for it, and then I find out these things aren't really lining up. There's some sort of asymmetry. And so to meet in the middle, we're going to charge, or we're going to discount the asset. Or maybe the data, the paperwork that you've provided is not up to date. It's 6 months old, so I can't really trust that. And so I'm going to assume some sort of risk. So really, actually, if I were to reframe it, what you're doing with the data symmetry, the trusted data, is instead of speculating risk or assuming risk, you can actually quantify it. And so I know right there and then that this expense is coming up. I don't have to guess. I know this expense is coming up because I have data about how well maintained your HVAC system is. Therefore, I can bake that into the price right away, $200,000 off the price tag, which gives me fair market value. And therefore, I have real real-time value, real-time insight into these asset classes. And as we're building that digital infrastructure that says, how do we capture all the data? How do we move the data? How do we verify the data? And then how do we use it? How do we use it in evaluation? How do we use it so that Cushman & Wakefield or JLL can appraise an asset more frequently, more accurately, to give us that value? How do we send this data off via API to a bank so that they get real-time updates and they can decide when they're overexposed, or a wealth manager so that he or she can decide to reallocate a portfolio? All that real-time value. So it's good that you brought that up, because that's so essential to what we do. And I have to hold back from being too passionate about talking about it, because then we could talk about financial instruments that are being created. So slices of equity or pieces of debt based off of that real-time data. And if we do want to talk about liquidity, fair market value is the driver of that. Because if we immediately agreed that this mic stand and phone were $150, I can give that to you right here. And then the thing is, we have to investigate this, and that's price discovery. Now imagine it's a massive property or portfolio properties. Price discovery takes forever. So if you discover the price and we agree on the price, we have no quarrels, then I will give you $10 million for the assets in this moment. I know that's what it's worth. Like Tesla stock, Apple stock, I can go online and see down to the cent what it's worth at that time. That's price discovery happening. And so those are fair market value. And that's why they're public. Before we were talking about what's the difference between public and private. It's that transparency, it's that data, and it's that price being available to people.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of cap things off, I want to talk about how you traveled a lot around the world, doing panels, speaking events. What is the biggest lesson you've learned from traveling around the world?
I don't know if there's one lesson. I've been learning a lot about myself and about the world and entrepreneurship. How to talk to people, how to interact, mannerisms, how I like to present myself, how I want to market myself, how to understand my self-worth and value through marketing, or through travel, and public speaking and activations. So I don't know if I can narrow it down to one. I mean, it's been very exciting. So in 2025, I hit a lot of unique locations. We were talking about me potentially going to Iran. Unfortunately, due to the conflict over the summer, I couldn't get in then, but I still made it to Dubai, which is in the UAE, Dublin, Ireland, London, UK, Hong Kong, all across the US. And now looking at this year, potentially Nigeria, back to Hong Kong, the Middle East a couple times, different places in Europe. I just joined the board of directors for FIBRI, which is the Foundation for International Blockchain and Real Estate Expertise. I'm the youngest on the board, and what's really interesting about this organization is every year they can request time in front of the UN. They are the only PropTech organization and NGO of a type to have special consultative status to the United Nations Economic and Social Council or Committee. And so every year they could request some time in front of the UN. And I will likely have the opportunity, I don't want to predict anything, but I will likely have the opportunity to go to Geneva, Switzerland to present to the UN, which is very interesting. All sorts of other online conferences, and just really cool stuff all around the world. And I've been doing some guest lecturing at universities. So I might at Concordia, which is in Canada. I might be going to Stanford, South Africa. I just submitted a bunch of colorful papers in different places. I'm working on a paper that's being submitted to IEEE for their ICBC, or a blockchain conference, which would land me to Australia. I think I almost wanted to package it into a big takeaway, but I don't know if I could really narrow it down. I mean, I've just learned so much about how to get what I want by standing up for myself, by understanding my value and my expertise that I have, become a much more comfortable speaker and communicating ideas, trying to simplify things. And the more that you can simplify a complex topic, the more that you demonstrate that you actually understand it. So hopefully I did a good job of that. I mean, we were kind of bouncing all over in the conversation. It was a really good conversation.
Yeah. A few more questions. What was your favorite country to visit? What was your most underrated, would you say?
Well, Hong Kong is always my favorite. It's always great to be there. The events that go on, fantastic. Easy to get around. Love hopping on a trolley or tram or taking the train to get places. Very clean, very orderly. Very interesting mix of Western and Eastern culture. Of course, it was a British colony at one point. Now, China is reclaiming a lot of that ownership, but it always had historical Cantonese influence. Culturally, they are Cantonese. So, just an exciting place, and it's very welcoming because it's bilingual. So, it's not too challenging to get around. Like, you feel like you could get around the same that you would in the U.S., but totally different cultural experience. So that's always number one. It's always really cool to go back there and speak at events, be part of events, go to the after parties. And the after parties are a lot of fun because Hong Kong is full of skyscrapers. So you're going to be on a 50-story building looking out over this lit up city, enjoying some VIP rooftop cocktails, which is really cool. Like, so you can't have a bad experience there. Underrated. I don't know if I have one place that's underrated, at least globally. There's different cities in the U.S. I could tell you what's overrated. I think Miami was overrated. I spoke in Miami recently. I think that you lived in Miami for a time, so.
I was there for, I did 5 podcasts a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Out there.
It
was fun, but, nothing crazy. I could never live there long term.
Yeah, it's a chaotic city.
A lot of flashy people
Right.
who try to be
Doesn't-
fake money.
Exactly. It doesn't feel super authentic. In some ways, I get the same vibe from Dubai. Now, there's a lot of really wealthy people in Dubai, but I think it lacks authenticity. Your golden Lamborghini, your golden Rolls Royce does not impress me. I don't know if I'm sure it impresses some people, but like to me, that just doesn't feel like I don't know. Like I want to see historical and cultural significance.
What have you built?
of place.
What have you built? That's
Exactly.
what I want to ask. I don't care what kind of toys you got. What have you done?
Yeah, right. And so meanwhile, you go to Dublin, Ireland, which I really enjoyed. I didn't like London. Dublin is like a cleaner, nicer version of London. Went to Dublin and the architecture is beautiful. Like you can walk around and you're dazzled by the historical significance of how people designed this and craftsmanship that went into that and all the Catholic churches which are there, which is my first time ever walking into a Catholic church. And I was like, wow, the artwork in here is so impressive. To me, that says so much more about the society and the people than how many golden cars you can wrap or your bottle service or just a lot of things that just don't impress me. So I don't know if I have an underrated one, but it's definitely overrated.
And how important has it been for your brand, your business, everything, to go to these speaking events and go to hundreds of events a year and speak on panels and everything?
Not quite hundreds. I do a
on
lot
your
of virtual
career.
stuff.
Yeah.
I do a lot of virtual stuff, which is equally valuable. I mean, I've been on a lot of virtual podcasts. This is very cool to do an in-person podcast. Lots of written interviews, talks, seminars. But lots of photos, very proactive with LinkedIn, but a lot of that is stimulated by my travel. If I say on LinkedIn, I'm attending this event and here are my takeaways, I couldn't do that if I was not present there. So that opens up doors. And the people will say, oh, I didn't know you were there. Or that's really cool that you were in the same room as these people. Or if you're speaking, wow, you're recognized as an expert or an authority figure in this space, even to the point where people are willing to pay for you to fly out to a country. They don't know you, they haven't interacted with you before, but they're going to pay you because they want you at your event, sharing your perspective, your domain expertise. And then I double down on that, and I'm slowly turning into a niche influencer. It's really interesting. There's a site called Fabicon, where you can look at how you stack up against other people. And I wasn't really tracking it, and then I saw that in terms of LinkedIn, I'm very proactive. I am one of the top voices in the world for things like urban planning, for blockchain, crypto, and fintech. And that just kind of happened because 2 years ago, my LinkedIn was nothing. I had some connections and I'd post once in a while. And then I grew into someone that actually had considerable influence over the space. And I can drive conversations about standards and frameworks because of that recognition. And a lot of it just comes from pictures from events or going to places. So it opened up doors and it totally changed public perception. And then not that I'm influenced by external validation. I don't need someone else to tell me that I'm valuable, but cool. At the same time, I happened to recognize that I was doing really significant things. And then I had more value myself as well. I really am traveling to all of these different countries and to major cities in the US and speaking at prominent events where people have spent decades building a name for themselves, building up empires. And then I'm there too, right next to them. And people treat me the same. I did that. I built that. I'm proud of that. Mm-hmm. It's cool. And I've become culturally enriched as a result. I see different parts of the world and I understand it. And I understand history and I understand systems and all this type of stuff. That's really cool. I should not take pride per se, but I should appreciate that I have that open-mindedness. I have the ability to learn, the opportunity to travel, and that I am changing the world. That's what I always wanted. I wanted impact.
Of course.
And now I have her.
I feel like we can go on for hours, so I'll wrap this up. What is, or who is someone that you share the stage with, either on a panel or they've been in the same event as you, that you would say is pretty cool to be sharing the stage with?
Well,
a big name. Yeah, someone.
I mean, it's a very good question. I wish I had the answer on the tip of my tongue. I mean, there's been events where Donald Trump Jr. has spoken, and I've spoken just very far apart, but I wasn't next to the guy or anything. People that I look up to that are just industry specific and saying, no, anyways, viewers. But I mean, I don't know that I have a really good answer for this one. A lot of fantastic people that I appreciate. And if I really go from the list, if I were to look hard, I could find some big names like Boston Blockchain. We had some prominent people like the CEO of Fidelity Investments. She's out there. Other thought leaders, the American Property Expo had some. The Pacific Blockchain Summit had I think the founder or co-founder of MetaMask, which is very popular mask. That's everyone's first mask, a wallet. People from Aptos. I don't know, but I think if people were to Google there to find the events, they could scroll through a list of other speakers and maybe pick out some they like.
If you could tell your 18-year-old self one thing before everything we know now, what would it be?
It's an interesting question. I was just interviewed by two publications. One was a 40 Under 40 USA. The other was a Voting magazine. And I had to put some real thought into like 5 tips I would give to my younger self. So I don't know what the best one is. The first place that I really like to start is that goodwill does not replace contracts. I have been screwed over by people. I have. But you don't know how to prevent that until you've really encountered it. And then you start to get a gut instinct for whether someone's telling the truth, whether they have ulterior motives. And then you start to enforce those contracts and say, look, we got to do pen and paper. It's not out of disrespect. I'm showing leadership here. We got to make sure things are squared away. So that's a really good one.
Yeah, gut, like you just said, I love that. Your gut instinct is right majority of the time.
Yeah. Which is incredible.
Yeah.
And I sometimes
intuition.
Sometimes I'm disappointed too, because I wish I could be wrong about my impression of someone, and then they do it, and it's like it's disappointing because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt and have high expectations. But so that's a good piece of advice. Maybe I could pull up the interview, but I know we got to wrap up here. So what else do I wish that I would have known? A good one is people like to be busy. They like to do a lot, but don't conflate all that action and speed with real momentum to progress. Do some of the boring work. Do things that are going to compound over time, not just what's going to get you attention in short term or make you feel like you're doing a lot, being productive. Really separate the signal from the noise. And I think that should be a big priority for people in 2026. Learn to focus and do things smoothly or slowly, a little bit slower, because slow becomes smooth and smooth is fast. You'll be much more effective that way. Another way to look at that is they say that 20% of the work is 80% of the results. It's very true.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, where can people find you on socials?
Well, LinkedIn is a really good place to find me. So if you were to type in Matthew A. Schneider, all the LinkedIn, try to post on there. And I'm open to people connecting with me and reaching out to me. So if they want to say, hey, I'd love to get your insight on this business idea, or I need you to speak at this event about entrepreneurship or about technology, I can do that. I'm on Instagram as well. I'm starting to vlog my travels a little bit more.
Right there. Yeah, the camera in
the
here.
360 camera, because people are saying, what do you mean you went to this country and spoke about that? What are you doing in that city? It's not, because it's not all fun and games for me. Like I'm working, I'm taking meetings, I'm doing these 24-hour flights and all this crazy stuff to get work done. So I started documenting it. So real Matt Schneider on Instagram as well. I have an X account, so it's Matt Schneider, but the last E is a 3 because someone already had Matt Schneider. Yeah, I'm out there. You can pretty much just Google my name and you'll find all my stuff.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.